Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome to the Guilty as Charged podcast. My name is Steven, and I am the host. I'm the only one today. Obviously, had to jump on and talk about the JC Jackson situation. I am leaving for Utah in a few hours to fly to my brother's wedding. Thankfully, I took the day off and could talk about this today. So, wild situation. Obviously, we've talked about how just bizarre and everything it is over the last few weeks. And it obviously came to a head and came to a finish today as the Chargers have traded JC Jackson to the New England Patriots, back to Bill Belichick, which, of course, that's the place where he's going. So, going to dive into kind of how we got here, the timeline of everything, and, of course, the repercussions of the decision to trade JC Jackson. Before we get started officially, Tyler and I did just record our episode on the Chargers feed. That did drop earlier this morning. So if you missed that, please go check it out. We obviously kind of dove into the Raiders game. We talked about kind of where the team is at during the bye week and in the AFC, and gave out some quarterly awards. Wanted to kind of zoom out a little bit and see really where the Chargers stacked up across the board. So again, please go check that out. I was going to do a mailbag segment for our Patreon supporters and YouTube members. I apologize, guys. That's not going to be happening today because of this video I've been working on getting information ready and getting everything supported and everything. Wanted to make sure that I could really talk about this in depth in the way that it requires. So I'll do a mailbag next week. I'll probably use a lot of those same questions. I'll post it again. But for those who we're hoping for a mailbag this week, I apologize, but that is going to be replaced by this video that is obviously open to the public. All right. As always, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Does really support the show, I should say, and we appreciate you guys. Okay. That being said, let's dive in. Chargers decided to ultimately move on from JC Jackson. So many different things to cover here. So I wanted to really dive into the specific timeline here. I apologize if you can't really see this very much, but I wanted to lay everything out on the table and just kind of, flush out the process, because there's a lot of revisionist history going on, and I think it's important that we address all of it. So obviously, going back to the spring of 2022, the offseason, Chargers had a lot of money. Chargers were rumored to be big fish hunting, obviously traded for Klumack. That has worked out pretty well. Sebastian Joseph Day, Austin Johnson, all these guys make up the core of the free agency group. But JC Jackson was the jewel of the group. And Brandon Staley we have all in footage of this. We have public press conference of this. They wanted a premier cornerback to come in and shadow number one receivers, play zone, play man, take the football away. Those were the key factors and the reason why the Chargers decided to sign Brandon Staley. Obviously, when JC Jackson is touring the facility for the first time, Brandon Staley says to him, "We knew that we had to get you into this building." They wanted him. They went and got him. They paid him a 5-year, $82 million deal. There was a lot of speculation about where he would stand in the cornerback market. I think that put him in the top 5 at the time, which had since been replaced. But they gave him a ton of money to come in and be this premium cornerback, one that could unlock the defense, be his version of Jalen Ramsey for the Chargers. And obviously that did not come to fruition. Now, I mentioned the revisionist history. There's a lot of people, I knew this wasn't going to work. I knew that, people who leave New England never work out the way that teams hope. Like, all this stuff is being spread on social media. Every single person was stoked. I shouldn't say every single person. The majority of people were stoked at this signing. We obviously were big fans of the signing. Every metric that we had looked at in man coverage, zone coverage, passer rating, forcing completions, anything pointed towards JC Jackson being a premium number one corner. Dubbed himself Mr. INT for a reason. And regardless of what your feelings are now, I think we were all very, very excited, including the Chargers, about the potential of signing JC Jackson. Fast forward to training camp 2022. JC Jackson is making incredible first impressions on the team, on the fans. He's making interceptions, making pass breakups, shines against the Dallas Cowboys in joint practices, Tyler came on this channel along with several other beat reporters that were pegging him as the best player in those joint practices, and that includes Micah Parsons and all these other guys. The JC Jackson was just nails for this team, completely locking down CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper. Or wait, that was probably after the Amari Cooper trade, excuse me. But JC Jackson was just locking everybody down in training camp, making a great first impression. Brandon Staley is at the podium every single day. We're so excited about this guy. He's going to crush it for us. So many positive vibes. Then the ankle surgery pops up. It's a phantom injury the Chargers supposedly did not know about. This is apparently something that JC had been dealing with for a very long time. There was a lot of pain and discomfort. He leaves the team, has the surgery back in Massachusetts, where he was comfortable with that doctor, comes back to the team, does his rehab and everything like that. And that's really kind of where this took a turn for the worst, unfortunately, for the Chargers. So he has this ankle surgery. And then week 2 against the Chief comes up. There's basically zero public indication that JC Jackson was going to play. He did not practice that week at all. He was still on the injury report. The Chargers were very careful about not placing him on injury reserve because they knew he would be able to come back at some point, because the ankle surgery happened, early in September, early into August. That he had, 6 to 8 weeks essentially to prepare for coming back. And that was kind of the estimated timeline. He comes back for week 2 after not practicing. It was not pretty. Justin Watson beats him for a big touchdown. And then it comes out that he kind of has this little setback. The ankle is not completely ready yet. So he misses week 3, comes back for week 4 against the Browns. And again, it's just not pretty. Week 5, not pretty. Week 6 against the Broncos, it was not great. He gets benched. And then finally in week 7 against the Seahawks is when he really starts to look like himself. And that is when the patella tendon tear rupture happens for JC Jackson. Obviously misses the rest of the season. I've talked a lot about my own experiences with that injury on this channel. Just completely set him back, obviously. And that's where he stood heading into the offseason. Publicly, privately, according Daniel Popper wrote about this, I've heard the same thing, that JC Jackson stuck around in Los Angeles for the entire offseason because he wanted to show the team that he was committed to recovering, committed to becoming that player that they signed, that they envisioned, that they were hoping for, that we were all hoping for. So he's in Los Angeles the entire offseason, working with the Chargers training staff, working with the Chargers doctors to get back on track. In 2023 training camp, he's ready for day 1, getting a pass breakup on Keenan Allen. Everything's all positive, right? Makes some plays sporadically because the Chargers kind of easing him back into things, ramping things up, attacking it very smartly, in my opinion, at that point. Then he suffers a minor setback that sidelines him, I think, for 2 weeks of practice. But the hope was always that he was going to be ready for the start of the regular season. JC Jackson was on NFL Network before training camp. I'm ready. I'm healthy. I'm going to intercept Mac Jones, which, now he's back on the Patriots. A lot of positive vibes about JC Jackson, comeback player of the year, all this talk and everything like that. Everything was very, very positive. There were definitely some pockets of negativity, but for the most part, everything was very positive. His first game back, which to me is a mistake of the Chargers, where they're having him shadow Tyreek Hill, which, like, who does that on a healthy corner, let alone like a player who's coming off of an injury like that. So he, right or wrong, he gets cooked by Tyreek Hill, and that tends to happen even against healthy corners. Week 2, Chargers are rotating corners. Basically, him and Michael Davis, first and foremost, are the ones rotating. JC Jackson is a healthy scratch in week 3, and then publicly questions the decision, says that he's confused. He doesn't know what more the coaches want from him. And also that he was not 100% healthy. He was doing what he could. According to reporters, he was emphatically stating that he was not healthy, but he was working through it. So week 4, he's active, which I don't know if he would have been if Dean Leonard were not injured, but he doesn't play a single snap. And then this week, obviously, the trade happens. Daniel Popper is writing in The Athletic that his relationship with the coaching staff is eroding behind the scenes, which is not a surprise when you publicly question the coaching staff and say that there was no communication. I'm confused. And then Brandon Staley comes out and says, we were very clear with him about the reasons why. Paraphrasing, but acceptance of that decision is another story, basically, is what Brandon Staley says. So now he's traded. Now he's back in New England. So I wanted to address kind of how we got to this point, because I do think it is important to make sure that we're all on the same page about what exactly happened here. We'll have some time to express some opinions about this signing and how everything has come down here in a minute. But from a timeline perspective, that's the way it went down. All right, financial repercussions. I'm hardly a financial expert, so I wanted to make sure all the information was out about this before I came out on here and talked about it. The Chargers are taking on the bulk of Jackson's remaining 2023 salary. According to Jeremy Fowler and others, they are converting most of his salary to a signing bonus, which frees up around $1.5 million in immediate cap relief. There was some possible mention of it being up to $7 million. My understanding, talking to Arjun and some others, is that it is $1.5 million in terms of cap relief. So the Chargers entered today with around $11 million in cap space. That should be closer to 13 at this point in time. For 2024, the Chargers are going to take on a pretty significant dead cap hit. Daniel Popper reported $21 million ish. But for the most part, they'll be able to get out of the majority of his contract after this season. So the Patriots are already saying that they are reworking his contract, because as it currently stands, they are slated to take on the rest of his contract. So essentially, the Chargers will not have to pay JC Jackson, while the rest of this contract plays out in New England. The dead cap hit is there. The dead cap hits will be there the following years, but for the most part, the Chargers are going to get out of this contract. You look here, looking at the legacy of this contract, essentially the Chargers paid around $40 million for 7 healthy games of JC Jackson. That's just obviously not ideal. This is obviously one of the worst contracts the Chargers have ever given out. The Donald Butler extension comes to mind. The Orlando Franklin deal comes to mind. But 7 games, $40 million, that's a pretty tough look. And again, it's impossible to not talk about this contract and not talk about the injury history. But that's a pretty damning sentence right there for 7 games, $40 million. Exact cap savings in the future are to be determined at this time. Some of these things are subject to change. From my understanding, the Chargers should save around $14 million in space each of the next 3 off seasons. Next season in particular, that is when the Chargers are going to have a ton of big decisions. We've talked about this several times on the show. Essentially, they had 4 big contracts that they were going to have to cut or trade, obviously being Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa, Mike Williams, and Keenan Allen. This frees up the opportunity for them to not have to cut 2 of them, and instead most likely only have to cut 1. Depending on who exactly is making these decisions, that could certainly change. But for now, it's you only have to cut 1 of the big 4 to get under the cap. So as it currently stands with the JC Jackson contract, you're around negative $16 million in the red for 2024. You have a bunch of rollover cap that is currently in play. You have a potential rise in the salary cap thanks to all the new YouTube money and gambling money, everything like that. But theoretically, the Chargers are going to have to cut at least 1 of the big 4 to get under the cap. And that certainly changes things. I think headed before today, I think we all kind of were assuming that was going to be Khalil Mack and Mike Williams. Maybe now it's just one of those 2. Maybe they decide to trade Joey Bosa. The one thing I'm confident with those big 4 is that Keenan Allen is going to be here to stay. Keenan Allen is playing at an elite level still to this day, and he is Justin Herbert's number 1 target. So really, it's deciding one of those other three that you have to cut and get under the cap. And again, things could change, people could change. Maybe they cut all three of them. Maybe they just decide to do one. Maybe they do two. I don't know. But right now, you only have to cut one to get under the cap and get manageable. You can do some other things, cutting Sebastian Joseph Day, restructuring Corey Linsley, which, that's obviously on ice right now. But that's the financial repercussions. On the field, on the roster, Brandon Staley seemed to basically publicly commit to the starting trio of Michael Davis, Asante Samuel, and Jasir Taylor after being in the Raiders. This decision today, to me, solidifies that decision. These three are your guys, barring an injury. Whether or not you think that they played well enough to merit that kind of public commitment or not is a different discussion. But these are your three starters. I'm hopeful that the settling of this situation can lead to some improvement, particularly from Michael Davis. Asante Samuel Jr. has played really well the last 2 weeks. I think we're seeing him kind of get back to his former self. Jasir Taylor is still kind of figuring it out, but these are your guys. This is your starting trio, barring an injury. As it currently stands, the Chargers only have 4 cornerbacks on the healthy roster. I mentioned the injury to Dean Leonard. He is currently not healthy. He has the hamstring injury. I don't think it's a long-term concern, but it happened late in the week leading up to the Raiders game. That kind of timeline makes me think that he'll at least miss the Cowboys game, potentially also the Chiefs game. But Jameson Omar can talk about that and has talked about that. But he's not playing against the Cowboys. I think that much is clear based off of his injury, based off of when it happened, and how the Chargers have kind of treated these injuries in the past. It feels like, generally speaking, under Brandon Staley, they like to have a ramp up period. So if he is, even if best case scenario, he comes back from the bye, he's feeling good, I would assume that he's a limited participant in practice that week, misses the Cowboys game, full participant leading up to the Chiefs game, and maybe plays that game. So right now you have 3 healthy corners. That's where the Chargers are at with this decision. They do have 5 safeties. Brandon Staley in the past has kept 10 defensive backs. It's what we formulated our predictions based off of. Right now they only have 9, and one of those is not healthy. So the Chargers are going to have to add somebody. Obviously, a lot of Bryce Callahan talk. I've seen some Casey Hayward talk. I don't think the Chargers are going out here to find a starting caliber corner. I think it's more somebody who is a depth option and can also play special teams. I do also think that it would be somebody who is primarily an outside corner, but can also play in the slot. So Brandon Staley traditionally likes to have a pure slot corner. Right now, that is Jasir Taylor. And then he likes to have a couple pure outside corners, Dean Leonard, Michael Davis. And then the other guy generally has to have some flexibility. So Asante Samuel Jr. has mostly exclusively played outside corner. They've cross-trained him from the jump to play the slot. We haven't really seen much of that come to fruition, but he has that ability. I think that's the kind of player that they'll be looking for to help fortify the depth. So that's not Bryce Callahan. He's a slot-only player. That's not Casey Hayward. He's an outside player. So I think you're looking for somebody who can do a little bit of both, play special teams, maybe be a veteran, maybe be a younger guy. I kind of would prefer to see a younger guy. It's possible that you're talking about a Tywan Mullen coming back, maybe a Cam Brown comes back. But I do think that they'll kind of go looking for a Dean Marlowe, Nick Van Nett-esque kind of player out there, Simi Fehoko, same kind of thing. Somebody that's out on a practice squad, somebody that's in shape, somebody that has familiarity with the scheme, somebody that has familiarity with the personnel. So that's kind of the player that I think you're looking at. Jake Hefner from Chargers Unleashed pointed out Greedy Williams as a possibility. I would like that. He hasn't played a ton, but he's a younger guy, taller, longer, can play outside, can play in the slot, has the speed to play gunner. So I think that's kind of an option that could at least make sense in the short term. Sidney Jones is a veteran player that has played some good ball for the Seahawks in recent memory. He's currently on the Bengals practice squad. that option makes some sense to me. There are some other practice squad players that I think you could go out and target. Um, you can bring Matt Hankins up for a game and see where that looks like. But for the most part, I do tend to think that they'll go out and try and replace his JC Jackson's roster spot with another cornerback who is more of a supporting caliber player, a depth player, and not really a starter. Because I think that the Chargers feel much better about their trio than fans do. Um, Whether or not you feel good about that is another story. But I think if this group can get Michael Davis back to the way he was playing last season, I do feel comfortable with where that group is at. That's a big if. You got to get Michael Davis there, but if he can get there, then I think you feel good about this group. Long term wise, I think this puts a big flashing neon light on cornerback in the first round in 2024. And I think that is regardless of who is calling the shots. Like, I don't care who the GM is, I don't care who the head coach is. This team does not have a long term asset at cornerback. You look at all of the other premium positions, and they have those long term assets. You have Justin Herbert, you have Rashawn Slater, Trey Pipkins is locked up for a good amount of time. You have the two guards. You have your wide receivers locked up with Keenan, Quentin, and Joshua Palmer. Tight end can certainly be in the conversation. And I think we could get to that point. But you have your edge rushers, Thule and Joey, at least for 2024. You have your safeties with Derwin James, JT Woods. Like, you have long-term assets there. Linebacker certainly could be in this conversation along with tight end. But you look at the cornerback room, you just traded away your one long-term asset, which was JC Jackson. And obviously we're hoping to get him back to his previous form, but he's gone now. Michael Davis is a free agent at the end of the season, hasn't played super well this year, is an older cornerback, and Asante Samuel Jr. will be heading into the final year of his rookie contract next year. Jasir Taylor, Dean Leonard haven't really played all that much. So you do not have a long-term asset at cornerback. So I don't care who the GM is. Like, cornerback is your number one need heading into the offseason. There's going to be a lot of, well, if you cut Mike Williams, you got to get a wide receiver. You don't have a tight end. You got to build around Justin Herbert, maybe Corey Linsley's situation. Does not improve. Maybe draft a center. You don't really have a long-term asset at linebacker. Derwin needs some help at safety. I don't care. You do not have a long-term asset at cornerback in the NFL in 2024. That's a huge problem. It's a huge problem, guys. You look at most of these other teams, and they have 2, 3, 4 long-term assets at cornerback, and you feel great about that room. You cannot head into the 2024 season without having a long-term asset at cornerback. Like, whether that's free agency or draft, I tend to prefer the draft at this point. Big time free agents, I'm kind of out on. This situation with JC Jackson is going to leave some scars. I was rooting for the guy, but it's going to leave some scars for me personally. So Alex Katzen on this channel has done a great job of highlighting some potential draft targets already. I know a good amount of our listeners love to talk about the draft. So if you're not watching Alex Katzen's videos, I think you're missing out. So I have not watched any draft prospects yet. Tyler hasn't. Alex Insdorf hasn't. Arjun hasn't. Alex Katzen is the reason that we have that kind of conversation going on already, because he is watching those tapes. He is watching the games and taking notes and everything. And so he's the guy that you want to talk to for draft needs. All right. That's pretty much everything. Unfortunate situation, man. It sucks. I was really rooting for JC Jackson. The recovery process obviously hit a nerve for me. The way he was talked about obviously hit a nerve for me. I'm bummed. I wanted JC Jackson to be able to come in here and play at the level, not necessarily at the same level, but play at a good level, play at a solid level. I think it would have been a great story for the Chargers. Sometimes things just don't work out. It sucks, but the Chargers are moving on, and I think we have to move on as a fan base as well. So, the Chargers went and swung big for the fences and struck out. Shit happens sometimes. So a bizarre situation comes to its end. I think a fresh start was needed for both of these respective parties. The Patriots don't have a single healthy cornerback on their roster right now. I don't even know if JC qualifies for that. Christian Gonzalez, all those guys are all injured. So, of course, it's back to the Patriots, back to where he's comfortable. We'll see what happens. Either way, Chargers had to move on. Very similar vibes to kind of the Jerry Tillery situation, although Jerry Tillery was not signed to a huge deal. But regardless, this is where we're at. So, wish JC nothing but the best. Hopefully, he's able to get healthy. But the Chargers obviously decided to move on here. So that I think is something worth talking about really quickly too. The Chargers under Brandon Staley are not afraid to move on from players who do not work out, and I think that's a good thing. Obviously, we would hope for every player they sign, draft to work out. But if it doesn't, Brandon Staley is going to move on. So we'll see what happens there. Obviously, hope Michael Davis finds his previous form. And if he does, I think the Chargers could be in a good spot going forward. All right. So that's going to do it for me today. Hopefully you guys enjoy the video. Crazy situation. Cannot remember anything like this happening during the bye week previously. But this is where we're at. So, like I mentioned, Tyler and I just dropped our recent video on the Chargers episode, or Chargers feeds earlier this morning. Please go check it out. We'll be live on Sunday morning for our usual Q&A that happens on Saturday. Saturday, I'll be traveling back from Utah. So stay tuned for Sunday. I'm sure we'll have a lot more JC Jackson questions to dive into that day. All right, guys, that's going to do it for me. We'll see you next time. As always, bolt up.